The land was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that only the desert can hold, wide, endless, and heavy. The air shimmered with heat, though the sun was already slipping down behind the hills. A lonely rider moved slowly through that stillness, his horse's hooves the only sound for miles. His name was Eli Mercer. He wasn't famous or rich. He was just a cowboy who had been on too many trails, seen too many sunsets, and carried too many memories he didn't talk about. His clothes were worn, his hat bent at the edges, and his horse, a dusty brown gelding named Buck, looked as tired as his rider. Eli had been on the trail for days without speaking to another soul. He liked it that way mostly. Talking had never brought him much comfort. The silence of the open plains was something he could trust. It didn't lie, didn't judge, and didn't remind him of what he had lost. A few years back, Eli had worked as a scout for the army. Those were hard years, the kind that left a man older than his bones said he was. He'd seen things he didn't want to remember and done things he didn't want to explain. When his service ended, he packed his saddle, bought a horse, and started drifting from one cattle job to another. Never staying long enough for folks to know his story, never close enough for anyone to ask. That day, he was heading south toward the San Pedro River. He'd heard of a ranch there looking for help with rounding cattle before winter. It wasn't much, but it meant a meal, a bed, and work. 3 things a drifter couldn't turn down. The land around him was beautiful in a lonely way. The plains stretched out forever, dotted with dry bushes and tall whispering grass. The sky was a deep orange turning to purple, and the wind carried the faint smell of dust and wild sage. It should have been peaceful, but something about that evening felt different. Strange. Eli felt it first in Buck's steps. The horse slowed down, ears turning this way and that, nostrils flaring as if catching a scent the man couldn't. Eli patted his neck gently. "Easy, boy," he murmured, but the horse didn't calm. He kept flicking his ears toward the line of cottonwood trees that followed the riverbank. Eli lifted his head, scanning the horizon. No movement, no sound of men or wagons, just the long golden grass bending under the wind. Still, his gut told him something was wrong. Years of life on the frontier had taught him to trust that feeling. The land had its ways of whispering when something wasn't right. He nudged Buck forward, following the river's curve. The sun was nearly gone now, leaving only streaks of red light on the clouds. The silence deepened as the night came creeping in. Even the birds had gone quiet. As he neared the cottonwoods, he noticed something ahead, a dark shape moving gently against the dying light. At first he thought it was an animal, maybe a bundle of cloth caught on a branch, but as he came closer, a chill ran through him. The shape was too still, too human. He pulled on the reins, stopping a few yards away. The figure hung from one of the low branches of a large cottonwood tree. The breeze moved it slightly, enough for Eli to see a small arm, a piece of torn fabric, and hair that caught the fading sunlight. His breath caught in his chest. He sat frozen for a long moment. Out here, you learned not to rush toward trouble. A man alone could end up dead that way. He listened. For voices, for horses, for anything that meant danger. But the land stayed quiet. Finally, he swung down from his saddle and walked forward slowly. The ground beneath the tree was dry and cracked. The air felt heavier, as if holding its breath. When he was close enough, he saw what it was. A young girl, maybe 12 or 13. Her clothes were torn, her skin dusty, and her hair long and dark. Around her neck hung a piece of rope, loose now, but still holding her in place. For a moment, Eli just stood there. His heart sank. He had seen death before, but this was different. She was a child, and she didn't belong in such a cruel picture. A small wooden sign hung from the tree trunk beside her. The letters were big and roughly carved. He stepped closer and read them slowly. "This is what savages deserve." Eli's jaw tightened. He looked at the girl again. Her features told him she was Apache, one of the native tribes that had lived on this land long before the ranchers, the miners, or the soldiers. He knew what that sign meant. He'd heard stories in the saloons and camps, angry men talking about raids, cattle stolen, and vengeance. He'd also heard what those same men did when they found a village or a camp. None of it ever sounded right to him, no matter how they tried to justify it. But standing there, he didn't want to think about sides, or history, or war. All he could see was a child. He took off his hat, pressing it against his chest, and said quietly, Lord have mercy. For a long time, he didn't move. He just stared at the tree, at the fading light through the leaves, at the stillness of it all. The sky had gone almost dark now, and the first star was shining above the hills. He turned to leave, his mind heavy. There was nothing he could do for her now, he thought. Maybe he could come back in the morning and bury her properly, but as he reached for his horse, something stopped him. A sound. Faint, soft, like a sigh carried by the wind. He turned sharply. The girl's arm twitched. He thought his eyes were playing tricks in the half-light, but then it happened again. A small movement, a weak breath. Eli's heart started pounding. "Hold on," he whispered, running back to her. He reached up and untied the rope, lowering her carefully into his arms. She was light as a feather, her body cold, her face pale, but her chest moved, barely, yet enough to mean life. He laid her gently on the ground and felt for a pulse on her neck. It was there, faint but steady. Relief washed over him, mixed with fear. Whoever had left her here might not be far. But he couldn't leave her. Not now. He looked around quickly. The river wasn't far. There were caves and rocks nearby that could offer shelter. He picked her up, wrapping her in his worn coat, and carried her toward the water's edge. His steps were slow but steady. Every sound made him turn. The rustle of grass, the hoot of an owl, even his own heartbeat. When he found a small hollow between two rocks, hidden by brush, he set her down and checked her again. Her breathing was shallow, but she was alive. He poured a bit of water from his canteen on a cloth and dabbed her lips. She stirred slightly, eyes fluttering for a second before closing again. He didn't know if she could hear him, but he whispered anyway. "You're safe now, little one. I got you." The stars came out one by one, bright and cold. Eli built a small fire using dry twigs, keeping the flames low so they wouldn't be seen from afar. The light flickered over her face, showing the faint bruises, the dirt, the exhaustion. But she was breathing. He sat beside her through the night, feeding the fire when it began to fade, watching over her like a guardian against the dark. Every now and then she murmured in a language he couldn't understand, soft, broken words that sounded like prayers. Eli didn't sleep. He couldn't. His mind was full of questions, who she was, what had happened, and who could do such a thing. But more than that, he felt something he hadn't in a long time, a reason to stay. The wind moved through the trees again, soft and low, as if the land itself was breathing easier. By morning, the desert would wake again, the birds, the sun, and the endless road. But that night, beneath the stars, a lonely cowboy sat by a small fire, guarding the faint heartbeat of a child the world had already tried to forget. The night was long, but Eli never closed his eyes. The firelight danced softly on the cave wall, making his shadow stretch and shrink as he moved. The little Apache girl lay beside him, wrapped in his coat, breathing slow and shallow. He kept checking her pulse now and then, making sure the faint beat of life was still there. Outside, the desert was cold. The kind of cold that sank into the bones once the sun was gone. Eli pulled his blanket tighter around the both of them and whispered, "You hang on, little one. You made it this far." When dawn came, a soft golden light filled the cave. The air smelled of dust and sagebrush. Eli looked out toward the river, which shimmered in the distance like a silver thread winding through the earth. The world looked calm, but he knew it wasn't. The land had seen too much hate, too much fear. He reached into his saddlebag, pulling out a small tin cup and a bit of dried meat. He softened it in the water from his canteen and chewed it slowly, his mind full of thoughts. Then, turning to the girl, he soaked a piece of cloth and pressed it to her lips again. This time she moved her head a little, her lips parting just enough to take a few drops. That small movement made something shift inside him. Hope, a feeling he hadn't trusted in years. By mid-morning, the girl stirred again. Her eyes opened slightly, dark and unsure, like someone waking from a long nightmare. She blinked at the light, her gaze landing on Eli's face. For a moment she looked frightened, trying to move away. Eli raised a hand gently. "It's all right," he said softly. "You're safe now. I ain't gonna hurt you," she didn't answer. Her eyes darted around the cave, her body trembling. Eli noticed how thin she was, how her small hands clutched the coat as if afraid it would be taken away. He spoke slowly, choosing words that sounded kind. "You were hurt. I found you near the river. You're safe here, understand?" Still, she said nothing. Her gaze stayed fixed on him, half afraid, half curious. Finally, she turned her head away and closed her eyes again. Eli sighed. He wasn't sure what else to say. Talking had never been his gift, and with this child, words felt even harder. He knew she didn't trust him, not yet. Maybe not ever. But he also knew she wouldn't survive out here alone. He spent the rest of the day taking care of small things. He fetched water from the river, cleaned the girl's wounds as carefully as he could, and gathered more wood for the fire. Every now and then she'd open her eyes and watch him quietly, but never spoke. As the sun climbed higher, Eli noticed a few tracks on the ground near the river, wagon wheels, boot prints, and horse hooves. He crouched to look closer. The marks were fresh, maybe a day or two old. He stood there for a while, staring at them, a cold feeling creeping into his chest. Whoever made those tracks had likely been the ones who hurt her. The thought made him uneasy, not because of anger, but because it meant danger could still be near. He returned to the cave and sat beside the girl again. "We can't stay here long," he murmured, mostly to himself. "Someone might come looking." The girl watched him but didn't reply. She just clutched the coat tighter. Later that afternoon, Eli saddled Buck and looked back at her. She still looked weak, her face pale, but he had to move before nightfall. He knelt beside her and said gently, "We're going to ride, all right? I'll take you somewhere safe." She didn't understand all his words, but she caught the tone. He reached out his hand, and after a long pause, she slowly put her small hand in his. He lifted her carefully onto the horse, then climbed up behind her, making sure she was steady. As Buck started walking, she leaned back slightly against him, too weak to sit on her own. Eli could feel how light she was, like a shadow in his arms. The desert stretched wide before them, glowing gold under the sun. The wind carried a soft hum, brushing against the tall grass. Eli didn't know exactly where he was heading. He only knew he needed to find safety, water, and distance from the people who had done this. They rode for hours in silence. The girl dozed off several times, her head resting against his chest. Each time she moved, he steadied her with a gentle arm. He could tell she was running a fever. Her skin was warm, her breathing uneven. He needed to rest again before night. By late afternoon, he found a small patch of trees near a stream. It wasn't much, but it offered shade and quiet. He dismounted, helped the girl down, and made her a soft bed of dry grass near the stream. Then he filled his canteen and let her sip a little water. When she opened her eyes again, he tried to speak in a gentle tone. "You got a name, little one?" She hesitated, then whispered something he couldn't quite understand. The words were soft, musical, Apache. He leaned closer, repeating it slowly, trying not to get it wrong. "Taza?" he said carefully. She looked at him, surprised, and gave a tiny nod. Eli smiled faintly. "All right then, Taza, I'm Eli." He pointed to himself, then at her. "Eli Taza." She blinked, then whispered, "Eli." The sound of his name in her small voice made him smile wider than he had in years. For the first time since he found her, he saw a hint of light in her eyes, faint but real. As evening came, he built another small fire, careful to keep it low. The colors of the sunset painted the sky, orange, pink, and purple. The world looked peaceful again, but Eli knew peace was always fragile out here. He sat across from Taza, mending one of his saddle straps. She watched him quietly, her expression softer now. He could feel her fear fading little by little. When he offered her a small piece of bread, she hesitated, then took it with both hands. She ate slowly, as if unsure whether it was real. When she finished, she looked up at him and said something in her language. He couldn't understand, but he could guess what it meant. Maybe "thank you," maybe "who are you?" He smiled and nodded anyway, hoping she could see kindness even when words failed. Night fell again, cool and still. The fire crackled softly and crickets began to sing in the grass. Taza lay down on the blanket, curling up close to the warmth. Eli sat with his back against a tree, his hat tilted low, watching the stars appear one by one. He thought of his daughter then, her laughter, her small hands, the way she used to run through the fields back in Kansas before sickness took her. It had been years, but the ache was still there, buried deep inside. Looking at Taza now, he felt that old ache again, but softer, like a wound beginning to heal. He whispered into the quiet, "You rest easy now, little one. You're not alone." The wind carried his words away across the plains and into the dark. Eli stayed awake a long time that night, listening to the soft sound of Taza's breathing. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and the echo rolled across the hills like a song. When the fire burned low, he added another branch and watched the sparks drift up toward the stars. In the glow of the flames, the girl's face looked peaceful for the first time. He didn't know what the coming days would bring: trouble, danger, maybe worse. But for now, under the wide desert sky, one lonely cowboy and one lost child had found a fragile kind of peace. And in that small corner of the wild land, for one quiet night, the world felt a little less cruel. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the hills, painting the desert in soft shades of gold and orange. Eli stirred first, careful not to wake Taza. She was still asleep, curled up under the blanket he had draped around her the night before. Her small chest rose and fell gently with each breath, and for the first time since he had found her, she looked peaceful. Eli took a moment to just watch her, feeling a quiet warmth in his chest. He hadn't expected this sense of responsibility for someone else. He had spent so many years alone, wandering from ranch to ranch, keeping to himself. But now, with Taza lying there in the soft morning light, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: a reason to care, a purpose beyond his own survival. He quietly gathered some dry wood and lit a small fire. The soft crackle of flames and the smell of smoke seemed to fill the cave with life. He took out the little tin cup he carried and filled it with water. Then gently he woke Taza. "Time to get up," he said softly. "We need to keep moving, all right?" Her eyes blinked open, and for a moment she stared at him, unsure. Then she nodded slowly. She was weak, but determination shone faintly in her eyes. She understood he was trying to help her, and maybe that was enough for now. Eli helped her sit up and offered her a sip of water. She took it carefully, holding the cup with both hands, and sipped slowly. He then offered her a small piece of bread he had brought from his saddlebag. She hesitated again, but eventually she ate, her small fingers trembling slightly. After breakfast, he helped her onto Buck, carefully adjusting her so she would not strain her small body. He rode behind her, steadying her with a protective arm, keeping the horse slow and calm. They set out along a narrow trail that ran beside the river, hoping it would lead them to safety. The day was warm, but not uncomfortably so. The wind carried the scent of grass and water, and for a moment the world seemed almost peaceful. But Eli knew better than to trust appearances. The frontier was a place where danger often hid behind the quietest moments. As they rode, Eli kept an eye on the ground. Fresh tracks appeared in the dirt: horse hooves, wagon wheels, and even some footprints that looked like men's boots. He frowned. Whoever had left those tracks had likely been nearby recently. He could only hope they hadn't noticed the girl had survived. He tried to keep his worry hidden from Taza, but she could sense it. Every now and then she would glance back at him with wide eyes, her small hands clutching the reins tightly. She had grown quiet since the day before, speaking only in soft whispers in her native language. Eli could not understand her words, but he sensed her gratitude, her fear, and her cautious trust. By mid-afternoon, they came to a small grove of trees near the riverbank. The shade was welcome, and Eli decided to rest there for a while. He dismounted and helped Taza down gently, guiding her to sit on a soft patch of grass. He gave her water again and helped her eat another small portion of bread. While she rested, Eli inspected the surroundings. The grove offered some cover, but it was not completely hidden. He could see open land on all sides, with the sun casting long shadows across the terrain. He knew they couldn't stay in one place for long. The frontier was vast, but it was also filled with people who had no patience for mercy or understanding. Taza watched him as he examined the area. Her eyes were wide, filled with curiosity and trust, and for the first time she reached out her small hand toward him. Eli took it gently, squeezing it lightly to reassure her. She smiled faintly, a shy, quiet gesture that made his chest tighten. They rested only a short while before continuing along the river. Eli kept the pace slow, making sure Taza could manage the ride. He spoke to her occasionally in soft words, teaching her a few simple English phrases. She repeated them slowly, her pronunciation hesitant but determined. It was a small victory for both of them. As they rode, the bond between them grew stronger. Eli began to notice small things: the way she flinched when the wind rattled the trees, how her eyes would light up at the sight of birds, or how she would hum softly to herself when she thought no one was listening. Each of these moments reminded him of the fragility and resilience of life, and he felt a deep responsibility to protect her. By evening, they came to a small rise overlooking a wide valley. The river curved gently through the land, and in the distance they could see hills rising like silent guardians. Eli stopped Buck and let Taza dismount. Together they walked to the top of the rise, the wind carrying the faint smell of water and grass. From there, Eli could see the path ahead. It was not clear, but it offered some hope, a chance to move forward to find a place where Taza could be safe. He pointed toward the horizon and said, "We'll go that way tomorrow. There should be a village or some settlers who can help. You'll be safe soon, I promise." Taza looked at him and nodded. She didn't speak, but the look in her eyes said she trusted him. That trust was both fragile and precious, and Eli knew he had to honor it. They set up camp at the top of the rise, using the sparse trees for shelter. Eli gathered firewood while Taza explored a little, picking up small stones and examining them with curiosity. She seemed more relaxed than she had since he found her, and Eli allowed himself a small smile. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Eli sat beside the fire and watched Taza curl up on a blanket. The air was cool now and the wind whispered through the grass. He thought about the events that had brought them together, how chance, fate, or perhaps something else had led him to find her when all seemed lost. He realized that their journey was far from over. Danger could still be near, and the world was not always kind to those who were different. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough to keep going. Eli stayed awake most of the night, keeping watch as Taza slept. He thought about the life he had lived, the lonely trails, the long hours in the saddle, the quiet nights with nothing but stars above. He had been alone for so long, and now, for the first time in years, he felt needed, responsible, and alive. As the first light of morning touched the valley, Eli gently woke Taza. "Time to move," he said softly. She opened her eyes, stretched, and nodded. They packed their small belongings, and Eli helped her onto Buck once again. The journey that day was slow but steady. They rode along the river, keeping to hidden paths whenever possible. Eli made sure to avoid open areas where they could be seen. He knew they were not yet safe, but each mile they traveled brought them closer to hope. By late afternoon, they came across a small clearing with a few bushes and a fallen log. Eli decided it would be a good place to rest for a while. He helped Taza down and set up a small fire. She ate, drank, and even laughed softly when Eli showed her how to skip stones across the water. The sound of her laughter was like music to his ears, a small light in the long shadows of the frontier. As evening approached, they continued their slow journey, stopping only when necessary. Eli kept his eyes on the horizon, always alert, always thinking ahead. He knew they could not stay in one place too long. The frontier was beautiful, but it was also unpredictable, and survival depended on caution, patience, and understanding. That night they camped under a group of large trees, the river flowing softly nearby. Taza slept peacefully, her small hand resting on his coat. Eli watched the stars appear one by one, and felt a quiet sense of hope. For the first time in a long while, he believed that perhaps they could make it, that this small, fragile child and the lonely cowboy could survive together in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving. And in that quiet, starlit night, Eli realized something important. Life was not just about surviving. It was about caring, protecting, and finding light even in the darkest places. The morning air was cool and fresh. A thin mist floated above the river, and the sound of flowing water filled the quiet valley. Eli woke early as always, stretching his stiff arms and brushing the dust off his coat. The sun had not yet climbed high, and the world still felt calm, caught between night and day. Taza was still sleeping, wrapped snugly in the old blanket. Her small hand rested near the fire's ashes, and her dark hair glowed in the dim light. For a moment, Eli just watched her. He was grateful she had slept peacefully. It had taken days for her to rest without sudden waking. Eyes wide with fear, he smiled softly and whispered, "You're getting stronger, little one." When she finally stirred awake, she rubbed her eyes and looked up at him with a shy smile. "Morning, Eli," she said carefully in broken English. Eli chuckled quietly. "Morning, Taza." He was proud of how quickly she was learning to speak a few words. Each day she picked up something new, repeating them until she got them right. He had started to feel like a teacher without meaning to. He gave her a bit of bread and dried fruit, and together they ate in silence. watching the morning sun paint the hills in shades of pink and gold. The desert could look cruel, but under the early light it seemed almost kind. After breakfast, Eli packed their few belongings. He tied his blanket behind the saddle and checked the water pouch. They had enough for the day, maybe two. He helped Taza climb onto Buck and they set off again, following the narrow path that wound along the river's edge. The air grew warmer as the day went on. The wind was soft, carrying the scent of grass and dust. The rhythm of the horse's steps was almost soothing, and Taza leaned back against Eli, half asleep. It reminded him of when his daughter was small, riding in front of him on the same kind of trail, her laughter mixing with the wind. That memory made his heart ache, but it also gave him strength. By noon, the land began to change. The river thinned into a stream, and the soft green grass gave way to dry brush and red soil. Eli scanned the horizon as he rode. Something felt different, the kind of uneasy feeling that made the back of his neck tingle. He slowed Buck and looked down at the ground. There were marks in the dirt, wagon tracks and boot prints. Fresh ones. He knelt to touch the ground, tracing the shape of the marks with his fingers. They hadn't been there long. Maybe a day, maybe less. Taza watched him curiously. "What is it?" she asked softly. "People," Eli said. "Been through here not long ago." Her eyes widened, a flash of worry crossing her face. Eli quickly smiled to calm her. "Don't you worry. We'll keep to the side trail. Stay quiet, stay smart, and we'll be fine." He guided Buck off the main path and led them through a stretch of tall grass. The horse moved carefully, its steps light and silent. Eli kept his eyes sharp, scanning the land for movement. He wasn't sure who the travelers were, ranchers, traders, maybe soldiers, but he didn't want to take any chances. The day passed slowly. The sun hung heavy overhead, and heat shimmered off the ground. Taza drank from the canteen in small sips, careful not to waste water. She was tired, but she didn't complain. Eli admired that about her. She was strong, even after all she had been through. By late afternoon, they reached a dry ridge overlooking a small valley. From there, Eli could see smoke rising in the distance, thin trails curling up into the sky. A campfire, maybe more than one. He crouched low beside a bush and watched. A few tiny shapes moved near the fire. Men, maybe 4 or 5, and a wagon. They were too far away to recognize, but their laughter carried faintly through the still air. Eli frowned. "We'll stay clear of them," he murmured. Taza nodded silently. She didn't need to ask why. The world had already taught her that not every campfire meant safety. They waited until the sun dipped low, painting the land in orange light. Then Eli led Buck carefully down the ridge, keeping the horse's hooves quiet on the rocky path. They moved slowly, shadows stretching long behind them. As night began to fall, Eli found a small patch of trees by the base of a hill. It was a good place to stop, hidden from view near enough to water and quiet. He helped Taza down and built a small fire, just enough to keep the cold away. They sat together eating a simple meal. Taza was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. Then she spoke softly, almost a whisper. "Eli, why do they hurt my people?" Eli froze. He didn't know how to answer right away. He stared at the fire, the light flickering across his weathered face. "Some folks don't understand what they fear," he said finally. "When they're afraid, they forget what's right." Taza looked at him, eyes shining in the firelight. "But you help," he smiled faintly. "Maybe I just got tired of seeing good people left behind." She didn't say anything after that. She just moved a little closer to him, the firelight warming her small face. Eli wrapped his blanket around her shoulders and said softly, "You'll be all right, Taza. I promise." That night the stars came out one by one, bright and endless across the sky. The air was cool, the only sound the soft murmur of the river nearby. Eli lay awake for a while, thinking about where to go next. He remembered hearing about a reservation to the north, a place where Apache families were being taken to live under protection. It wasn't perfect, but it was safer than the open trail. Maybe that was where she needed to go. By morning, he had made up his mind. They would head north. The next day, they started early. The journey was rough. Rocky hills, dry ground, and a sun that burned bright and unforgiving. But they kept going. Taza was stronger now. She rode with her back straight, her small hands holding the reins with more confidence. Along the way, Eli taught her simple things. how to tell direction by the sun, how to spot animal tracks, and how to listen for water. She listened carefully, eager to learn. Each time she got something right, she smiled with quiet pride. They spoke more now, mixing English and Apache words, laughing sometimes when they misunderstood each other. Their laughter felt like a small light in a world that had too much darkness. By the time evening came, they reached a wide plateau that overlooked miles of rolling land. From there, they could see far into the distance, valleys, rivers, and the faint shadow of mountains. It was beautiful, endless and silent. Taza pointed toward the far horizon. There? She asked. Eli nodded. That's where we're going. The reservation. You'll find your people there. She looked at him for a long time, then said softly, You come too? Eli smiled sadly. I'll take you there, but I can't stay. That's your home, not mine. She looked down, her voice small. You are my friend, he swallowed hard, and you're mine, little one. That night, as they camped under the stars again, Eli watched the fire burn low and thought about everything that had brought them there. The cruelty of strangers, the quiet strength of a child, and the strange mercy of fate. He didn't know what waited ahead, but he knew one thing for certain. He would see her safely to her people, no matter how far or how long it took. The land around them was wide and silent, the stars above endless. And in that quiet, a lonely cowboy and a brave young girl continued their journey, two souls bound by fate and kindness, moving toward hope through the heart of the desert. The sun had barely risen when Eli and Taza mounted Buck and began their final stretch toward the reservation. The morning air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of earth and river water. The world felt quiet, almost peaceful, though Eli kept a careful watch as they moved. The journey had been long and tiring, and both of them felt it in their bones, but they were close now. Taza rode carefully, sitting tall and steady. She had grown stronger over the past days, her small hands holding the reins with confidence. She glanced at Eli often, her dark eyes full of trust and something like hope. For him, those looks were worth every mile, every night of restless watching, every worry that had kept him alert and tense on the trail. They rode along the river, following the curves of the land, crossing shallow streams, and keeping to the shaded areas whenever possible. Eli pointed out landmarks, teaching her how to remember them so she could find her way if she ever needed to. She repeated the names and directions carefully, and he smiled quietly to himself, proud of her focus and determination. Around midday, they stopped for a brief rest on a small rise overlooking a wide valley. The sun was high now, warm but not harsh, and the river below sparkled in the sunlight. Taza dismounted, stretching her legs and walking a little along the ridge. Eli sat nearby, keeping an eye on her, watching her tiny shadow move across the land. You're almost there, he said softly. Just a little farther. She nodded, though her small lips trembled slightly. She was tired, but there was a glimmer of excitement in her eyes. This place and the reservation would be her home again, with people who understood her language, her culture, and her family. The thought of it seemed to make her stronger, more determined to keep going. As they descended the ridge, Eli kept careful watch for travelers or hunters, but the path seemed clear. The land stretched out in gentle hills dotted with trees and patches of grass. In the distance, smoke rose from a few small settlements, the first signs of civilization they had seen in days. Taza's eyes lit up when she saw it. There, she whispered, pointing toward the smoke. Home? Eli nodded. That's where you'll find your people. We're almost there. She looked at him, her small face serious and thoughtful. You come? He shook his head gently. I can't. This is your home, Taza. Your family will take care of you now. Tears formed in her eyes, but she didn't speak. Instead, she leaned back against him on the horse for a moment, feeling safe one last time with the man who had carried her through danger and fear. They reached the edge of the reservation, just as the sun began to dip low in the sky, painting the land in shades of gold and orange. Families were visible in the distance, moving quietly, tending to small gardens or leading children toward the river. The people looked calm, welcoming, and alive in a way that Eli hadn't seen in a long time. Eli guided Buck carefully through the entrance, keeping Taza close. She dismounted, looking around with wide eyes at the familiar faces and surroundings. She recognized some of the language, some of the customs, and it filled her with a sense of belonging she had not felt in weeks. A woman approached them, her face kind and gentle, and Taza ran into her arms. Eli stayed back watching quietly, a small smile on his weathered face. The woman looked up at him, gratitude in her eyes, though Eli merely tipped his hat and nodded. "I will take care of her," the woman said softly. "She's safe now." Eli nodded. "I know. That's why I brought her here." Taza clung to the woman for a moment longer, then turned her head slightly to look at Eli. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice small but full of meaning. He nodded again, swallowing hard. "Be brave," he said softly. "And remember, you're strong, Taza." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held both sadness and gratitude. Then, with a gentle tug on the woman's hand, she walked away, disappearing into the warmth and safety of the community. Eli watched until they were out of sight, his heart heavy but full. He turned back to the trail he had ridden for days, the land stretching wide and empty before him. The quiet of the frontier seemed different now, softer somehow, filled with the memory of the child he had protected and guided. For the first time in years, Eli felt a sense of peace. He had been alone for so long, wandering without purpose, but now he knew that even one act of kindness could make a lasting difference. He mounted Buck and rode slowly, the wind carrying the faint scent of the river in the trees. The sun had set, leaving a deep blue sky filled with stars. Eli looked up, letting the quiet of the land surround him. The journey was over, at least for this part of life, and he felt the weight of exhaustion mix with a strange lightness. For days, he had carried the fear, the responsibility, and the hope for Taza. Now she was safe with her people where she belonged, and even though he would continue his life alone, drifting from place to place, he carried her memory with him. That small, brave child had reminded him of what it meant to care, to protect, and to hope. The desert stretched on endlessly before him, shadows deep and the wind soft on his face. He let Buck lead the way, not needing to follow a map or a destination. The frontier was wide, dangerous, and beautiful all at once, just like the life he had chosen. As he rode through the night, he thought of Taza and the bright, resilient spark in her eyes. He imagined her safe, learning, playing, and growing among her people. And though he would not be there to see it, he felt certain she would thrive. The stars above shone brightly, as if blessing the end of their journey. The quiet hum of the night, the rustle of grass in the wind, and the distant flow of the river filled him with calm. He realized that the bond they had formed, silent, unspoken but real, was something he would carry with him forever. When the first light of dawn began to touch the horizon, Eli paused on a small ridge. He looked back toward the reservation, now just a faint memory in the distance. A smile touched his face. He whispered, "Good luck, Taza. Be happy. Be strong." He turned Buck toward the open plains once more, riding slowly into the wide, endless desert. The journey ahead was unknown, as it always had been. But for the first time in years, he felt ready. He had done something that mattered. He had helped someone. And sometimes that was enough to change a life. Maybe even two. The wind carried him forward, the soft sound of the river fading behind him, the stars slowly giving way to morning light. Eli rode into the new day, the lonely cowboy who had found purpose in the heart of the frontier. And somewhere under the same sky, Taza lived safe and whole, carrying the memory of the man who had guided her through fear and darkness toward hope. The world was wide and uncertain, but for now, it was good. For both of them, it was a beginning.